Good morning, and thanks for joining us today to take a strategic look at a proven decision model for executing a successful SIEM deployment. The content today is targeted towards decision makers who are either looking at SIEM for the first time as a result of compliance or a security initiative, or for those that have had challenges in the past with the SIEM deployment and are looking for tips for improving their second round. So the agenda today, we're going to start with product selection criteria, recommendations from 3 different viewpoints on choosing SIEM. The second thing we're going to look at is a life cycle staffing and skill set model. Not only what you have to get going, but what do you really need to put in place to manage this long term. There's a lot of surprises along the way in terms of staffing, and this has been a big area of underperformance for organizations. Deployment methodology, what's the best practices in terms of stepstoning your way into a successful model from a strategic standpoint? And insourcing versus outsourcing, what's the best option? Should you walk into this from an outsourcing and testing, or can you go all in on staffing this long term and just taking a look at the pluses and minuses and the decision model along those lines? And then finally, we're going to finish up with a Q&A. So let's get started. So a lot of times it starts with just throwing SIEM out there to get it turned down for compliance. We see a lot of our clients are backed into a corner. They have a short deadline on compliance and have maybe put off SIEM for a long time because of the cost and complexity, and they just get it out there. So this actually leads to a lot of challenges, and to keep the content lighthearted, we wanted to kick things off with, hey, we all make mistakes on how this happens. So today we're going to collect and regroup on what a framework for good decisions are. So the source of the presentation content from today comes from a number of different things. First of all, it comes from RKON leadership and our experience with 300 clients. We've been a managed service provider and vendor for around 12 years and helping clients deploy and implement these solutions at their customer base for a similar amount of time. And of course, vicariously, we've been involved with a lot of clients along the way and watch what they've done. So this is a collection of the good, the bad, and ugly that not only we've performed and executed, but everybody else in the market as we come to a very mature offering at this moment in time. So there's some great feedback I think we can draw from there. Gartner Group, as always, is a great source of information. We at least need to take their opinion into account. There's an individual that does a lot of analyst work at their organization that we have listed here who would be worthwhile to check out some of his articles. It's pretty good stuff. And then Infotech Research is an organization that's done some independent evaluations of SIEM, and we actually really like their roadmap. They've got a magic quadrant similar to Gartner Group we're going to get into as well. And then finally, RKON's got an annual technology survey that we're able to gather some interesting stats along the way. So to kick things off, the 4 contributing factors of failed SIEM deployments all really fall into these different categories. First, the choice of tool. The second is the staffing levels and the budget associated with executing SIEM is a big challenge. Staffing skill sets, getting the right people on to manage this. And then finally, deployment scope. Not only what you deploy, but how you deploy it and how your steps are. So most of the challenges fit into that. And these topics are kind of cover the majority of today's. So let's start with SIEM vendor criteria, picking the right technology. The challenge really begins with treating SIEM as just another technology based on features, popularity, product price is a dangerous combination. And you know, a great source and a good starting point for all these technologies is Gartner Group. First of all, Gartner Group is a great source and a reference. We look to Gartner Group as well because it shows market share, viability of the company. And if you look over several years, you can see who is the up-and-comers and who's fallen behind from an R&D standpoint. So it's a great source from that standpoint. Unfortunately, Gartner Group evaluates technology for a limited criteria, in our opinion, beginning with completeness of offering, which essentially is the product and basically most of the product that has the most features and the ability of the backing company to execute on that. So they evaluate finished mature implementations and feature set, which is useful But what they don't tell you is this technology is awesome, but there may only be a dozen organizations in the U.S. that have the size and complexity and budget to execute on this to maintain it. So they don't really take a real company, implement the product, and follow it for several years to measure cost and effectiveness. They really jump to the end result. Again, a good source, but we caution you with that. So the other thing is companies get involved, and we all do this, on picking products with cool features. The charter of SIEM funding starts with compliance, and in most cases, but by the time you finish, it really turns into more of a security tool decision, which isn't bad as long as you understand why you're buying this and where it goes wrong. It's a powerful tool. It can be a CISO's best friend, but companies that just need to be compliant should make sure that that portion of the project can be executed within the cost and time. So cool features is often identified as who's better than the other guy, but in reality, a lot of times you really never get to that last 5% of the implementation anyway. References. As long, and of course you need to check this, but as long as they have references that's done it before, it's a great source of validation. And then price of the product, not price of the installation and maintenance. So the formula is, what features do I get for the price? Gartner Group and references are validation, and the price is based on full deployment often. Rarely do companies really determine the scope of what they actually need versus the scope of what they want. And often there's an opportunity, especially in compliance plays, to limit the scope of deployment and save tremendous money versus just buying on price and full deployment. So all these things have to be taken into account. And if you don't have experience going through a SIEM deployment, this formula can be a little tricky. And you got to realize that SIEM can literally take years, and it's more of a ongoing process than a tool. It's a tool that's in the center of an ongoing process that redirects how you think about security. So all that's good, but we really think it only adds up to about 10% of the decision. Below the surface is really what we want to talk about and where we focus from our experience. And we run metrics on where our costs are, and we've kind of grouped all these things internally to figure out how to price out our SIEM offering from a management standpoint. And here's what we came up with. So first of all, cost of execution is probably the number one thing you need to look at. Instead of looking at the startup costs, these jump starts that set the product up, even for small installations, are like $50K. And it just simply gets you to the point where your team's just completely overwhelmed by alerts and false alarms. Sometimes this can stall out deployment right away if the team doesn't have the discipline to ignore those alerts and focus on the big picture of what they're trying to solve or work on tuning. Companies often think the big work is done at this point and don't realize the majority of the work is beginning and requires a much higher level skill set to execute. And we'll discuss this later. You need to have a team that understands process, enterprise infrastructure, so they can understand the nature of the logs and the alerts and what would trigger them. So executing and tuning is typically a 12-month project, assuming the organization doesn't change a lot. So the next thing is cost of staffing. The type of people you're going to need is a background, minimum 5-7 years in security infrastructure with a background in enterprise architecture. So they understand interdependence and have some involved with audit compliance process. And with this background, it's really going to take them 6 to 12 months to gain competency in the tool if they don't have any experience with it. And remember, this technology is a 10x complexity of most other security devices. So every installation really requires 2 level 3, 4 security analysts, or you shouldn't do this in-house. This is not something your firewall guy can do on the side, as we're going to talk about. And undermanning this thing is the number one reason why these projects end up failing. So ease of reporting. How quick can you get to an audit ready compliance proof? This means the technology has to be working. Alerts have to be at a minimum quiet. These reports should not take an excessive time to customize your program. So you really want to start with the end and what you're going to be showing an auditor and work your way back towards the beginning. ROI, picking a technology again on cool features is the beginning of the trouble. What the cost of adding a feature and capability is needs to be looked at from an execution standpoint. They may have a cool feature, but what do you really have to do in people, process, supporting technology to execute? You also have to take a look at where your ROI is. Is our ROI to be compliant? Is it to be secure? You have to be very specific about that to maintain scope, because these things can be extremely large projects. Speed to value, how quickly will we look compliant? How quickly will we be compliant? How quickly will we improve security? And so all these things need to be taken into an account. So let's take a look at two different views of this technology. So using industry standard analyst reports as a source for guidance on SIEM selection can be a confusing process. We're going to take a look at two, one from Infotech Research Group and Gartner Group, info on the left-hand side. Both have different criteria for how they will evaluate this. Let's start with Gartner Group, who gives IBM, HP, Splunk, Intel, LogRhythm the nod on the Magic Quadrant up in the right-hand corner. So let's map this group back to Infotech. You're going to see the majority of those are actually in what they call a market pillar category. And this is kind of important, not the champion, but keep in mind RKON's analysis and Infotech's analysis in these are their first generation technologies that are primarily developed 15 years ago. And they're all struggling to keep up with newer next gen tools. And so all these technologies take, for the most part, huge commitment of time and resources and discipline to be effective. The learning curves can be excessive, and just to keep them running to deliver value. So most of these technologies are well beyond the capabilities of even large IT shops to gain ROI. So if they're difficulty and costly to implement, why is Gartner Group giving them the nod? Their evaluation criteria, again, is based on installed and working clients to measure how complete the offering is. So, one of the things that's interesting is, as you see on the left-hand side, the trailing product. The market pillars through Infotech are actually considered trailing products. They're, if you move straight up that continuum to leading products, you can see LogRhythm is far above them. The reason why those are further to the right is just because they're with larger, more stable companies, which is obviously a factor. So Splunk is a totally different story. Gartner Group has them in the upper right-hand quadrant, and Infotech measures them as an emerging product, not only a young company, but a trailing product in terms of offering. So our view on this, we're a little bit surprised that Gartner Group ranked them so high as a SIEM. We like Splunk a lot. We use it as well, but it's a toolkit that has little out-of-the-box SIEM functionality and features that you can just turn on and get running like you can some of these other technologies. So it really takes an extraordinary effort to implement Splunk into a fully operational SIEM tool, and it's unnecessary. There's a lot of tools that are already out of the box, have templated approach, and so again, it's a good add-in tool. But we frankly agree with Splunk that with Infotech Research Group, that Splunk is really not a true SIEM. It's a great toolkit. And finally, let's take a look at LogRhythm. It's the only tool that is in both Magic Quadrants for good reason. We've evaluated all these technologies, both in our labs and through our customer eyes, premise work we've done in terms of integration. And honestly, in our opinion, by a long shot, the best technology is LogRhythm. We had resisted swapping it out. It wasn't our original pick 10 years ago when we standardized. We had resisted swapping it out because of the difficulty we had in implementing the original tool, but we were ecstatic to see the impact and how quickly it happened in terms of executing, getting it up to speed, and the tangible results for our clients. So we really changed our standard based on LogRhythm, and in our opinion, we think they've got the best offering. And I think through the two different views of this, you can see others agree with us as well. So let's talk about misjudging skills and staffing and the belief that often that it's easy. Optimism bites us all, and where does it come from? Well, it starts with the vendors. They really want us to believe that it's easy. Why? Because it helps them close deals. We want to believe it's simple. Why? Because once we take a look at the technology, we'll do whatever we can to buy it. And part of that is lowering the bar. We just all do it. It's human nature. We usually want it for our people too. Let's think about it. I hear this all the time. Our people are smarter. We got to give them a career path. There's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of smart people in IT. They have to overcome challenges that other industries just don't have. But the truth is, smarter doesn't really get us, doesn't really solve the challenge that we're having on this. So common errors in staffing. We've been doing this for a long time. As we help our clients through these decisions, we see a lot of commonality in how they think about bringing on new technologies. And these are things we hear them say all the time. Number one, SIEM is just something my firewall is going to do on the side. And I can tell you, we've got 10 organizations that have said that. And our answer is, wait till you turn it on. Even a small installation requires a full-term person. So you're going to lose your firewall guy to SIEM and, realistically on this. We train our people to do this. You know what? You can do that. It's going to take you a couple years. We're just going to absorb the extra work. I hear that quite a bit. And my answer is, you know what? Save your money. Don't buy SIEM. This is not something you're going to be absorbed. It's going to literally change your organization and how they work operationally and how you look at security. And you know what? It's the thought that our engineers will stay if we teach them something new. And you know what? There's truth to that. You have to give your people a career path and a growth path. But the truth is, right now, there's 200,000 open security jobs. This is an article recently in Forbes saying there was 1 million worldwide. And there's 25% turnover in security. And this is really one of the main reasons why security ends up failing. People put it in, they train people up, and all of a sudden, even the most loyal people have the ability to make life-changing money. If you can make $30,000 or $40,000 more a year, it's going to break even the most loyal of people. So anyway, these are just common errors to think. So there's certain expected staffing model that we see, and I think there's a lot of truth in the way this works for most security tools. Again, SIEM is just not a security tool, but the typical model is the first month, the workload goes up. We start to ramp up, it climbs steeply, we add more and more resources and time. The third month, when we're in full deployment of whatever technology it happens to be, we're at a peak of all time where we're going to have to staff. And then the expectation is that it's going to drop down 4 to 6 month maturation, and then it'll end up being a long-term staffing of a part-time. And this is probably a typical model for a lot of security and infrastructure. But the actual SIEM staffing model doesn't work like this. Managing the tool is really 25% of the work. It's the work that comes out of this tool that can be overwhelming. So we climb the same progression, but the long-term staffing is just dramatically. And why is all this necessary? We're going to break into where this workload is. But just keep in mind, in general, once security events become exposed, that's really going on, organizations are then obligated to follow up and figure out where these things are going and why they exist and how to remediate them. So it's not that the workload increases, the visibility on the workload that exists increases. So let's start with SIEM maintenance, just to keep the thing healthy. To begin with, adds, moves, changes, integrating new devices. Every time in a fully deployed SIEM solution, every time there's a change or a move, the people managing the SIEM are going to have to be involved to integrate that. Every time there's an addition, a change to anything in the organization, there's going to be a change control on the SIEM side as well. Software patching and updates. Of all the systems that we patch and manage and update, SIEM probably is at the top of the list that has the most updates. And again, it's a fast evolving technology, and there's a lot to keep up with in terms of the manufacturers. And this is something that if organizations start ignoring for a couple months, the whole solution just stops working. And this is a surprise, but monitoring, and this happens with all the SIEMs, right? monitoring and log flow just stops. It just stops working. So there has to be a constant digging into the system to make sure all of its reporting right. We've seen some deployments where they're like, hey, we must be secure. We haven't gotten alerts to find out that doing a health check and half their stuff's not reporting. And again, with troubleshooting, there's a constant workload along this. And this has nothing to do with tuning the system or answering incidents and following up on security. This is just administrating the system. So tuning and optimization, you have to understand that this position is going to be collaborating with all areas of IT. They're going to have to work with every department. They're going to have to start converting your compliance and policy into rules and tune the rule base and eliminate false positives, which are going to be tremendous out of the gate. To eliminate those false positives, they're going to have to interview everybody in your organization and work with them to come up with a collaborative solution on those kind of things. And over time, they're going to have to develop new use cases for deployment. So this is kind of the brains behind the whole operation, and often a misunderstood position. It's not a full-time position in a mid-sized organization, but it really has to be at the top of your food chain for somebody to take this on. They need to understand everything happening in your environment. Incident response is probably the one area that makes a little more sense from a tangible standpoint. And it really is the incidents, the security incidents, and the alerts that the system's kicking out that are breaking either the policy or the template that's been applied. This is about ticket management, digging into these incidents, seeing whether they're real, they're not real, what the nature of them are. Are they from policy? Are they from design? Is it configuration? Or is there a real security issue going on? Again, they're going to have to collaborate and advise with the IT team across all areas for triage and remediation. And eventually there's going to be a reporting, post-incident follow-up, and feedback to SIEM. This is going to create a lot of workload. It's going to change workflow in your organization and the way you look at things. Often you're going to catch problems before they happen. And so instead of a system administrator in another department finding something, security might find it first and be a little bit of an owner in that incident management. So it's going to change a little bit of the politics and the way things work internally. Again, critical that this is staffed full-time. This is not something that you're going to be able to handle part-time. So let's talk about the 7 elements of a SIEM process. We talked about the maintenance and what needs to be in place. You're really going to start with your policy and compliance standards. They're going to feed your rule implementation and your tuning. You're going to provide, SOC monitoring and incident response from that rule base that's been implemented. You're going to work with subject matter experts in all the departments for change control, plus remediation, and ultimately we're going to deliver proofs and compliance. So this is a cycle that organizations get visibility into once they put SIEM in place, and just thought it might be helpful to show that visual. So let's talk about the team. How many people does it take to run SIEM? Assuming SIEM has been installed and configured correctly, there's a few skill sets needed that we've talked a little bit about. Now, the first guy, just to give you a little background, this is the SIEM admin. They do the running function, and you could grab maybe an experienced firewall person that's done that position. Maybe they're 85 to 105, and that range was pretty typical from what we've seen in a mid-sized deployment. This is probably a day or 2 days a week, and again, when the system needs major updates, it can be a mini project. So this is a part-time thing, but it's not something you can throw a part-time skill set at. The SIEM expert, this is really the high-end skill set, the tuning. This has got to be your 115 to 135 skill set, or you're not really going to, the tuning, if you don't tune this thing correctly, you're going to kill your security analysts and your guys responding. They're just going to get overwhelmed with alerts, and that's how you know you messed up on your tuning, because you're hiring incident response guys because you can't keep up the alerts. This is how you gain ROI. You tune that system down, but it's an expensive guy. Your security analyst, again, works directly with the SIEM expert for tuning and feedback, and having an ethical hacker background is ideal for these folks. So again, we talked about SIEM touches really everything. And when SIEM goes in and a compliance template is applied, organizations should expect to see a flood of alerts created from all areas. So your processes, if security is not tied into change control activities during a deployment or upgrade, you can imagine the level 1 severity alerts that you're going to be receiving. From a compliance, what compliance are we trying to fulfill, and how far along are we will greatly impact what SIEM delivers alerting information on, even down the roles and responsibilities. Who's responsible for what, who can access what. Applications is something that a lot of people don't really think about. The way your applications work and the way they can interact with the environment can create alerts. This is the obvious one, the technology. Not only infrastructure in your enterprise, but your perimeter technology. Obviously, a lot of the feeds are going to be coming from that. But again, your processes, your compliance, and your applications are what drives a lot of that. And of course, they're going to have to marry with your ticketing system. How are you going to create proper follow-up remediation if you don't have SIEM tied into your ticketing system and your up-down monitoring? So you just have to think about that. And we kind of ran into a real case study that occurred with a client around an application, actually, that we thought we'd share with you. So the client had an application that SQL was tied in with their Active Directory, and so it actually used privileged user rights to integrate with Active Directory. The problem was it needed about 1,000 accesses a day, which broke a couple different policies. And when we turned this on, the client went in a complete panic over all the alerts they're getting. They literally got 1,000 alerts in a day. The challenge was we had to go back and have them reprogram how this works so that it wouldn't use privileged user rights and change the architecture a little bit. It just shows you the discipline of what you have to have over time. And the thing to keep in mind is it's alerts is the reason why SIEM deployments get shelved, because there's so many people don't know how to react, and when they reach out to those other departments to solve things, they realize the number of changes that have to be made, and then what do they do with all these alerts in the interim? So there's a real kind of giving up on the cause type of thing that happens. So kind of along those lines, just as a summary, SIEM is going to expose problems with change control, your organizational chart. Whether you guys have teamwork, is there a lot of infighting, or do you have good collaboration? Because this can be very intrusive, right? Segregation of duties is going to have to be matured. Roles and responsibilities along those same things. How strong is the CISO governance position in the organization? This is one of the first things that's going to be exposed as to how well they are positioned in the organization and how much authority and influence do they have. How good is your remediation? Certainly don't put SIEM in if you can't keep up with patching your systems, because there's just no reason to do it. IT technical skills. This is going to expose really a lot of not only what their skills are, but how they configure things and your network design. So all these areas are going to be coming under fire as soon as SIEM goes in. So let's talk about deployment scope and mistakes, because this is where really once you turn the thing on, where do we go? How do we deploy from here? Is going to be it's going to have a great influence on your success. And a lot of organizations have this kind of, we'll just get it out everywhere and get the alerts going and back into it from there. We do not recommend that at all. That boil the ocean really just never works. And even if you have the right funding and scope in place, you need to have a controlled deployment so you can build success and gain collaboration and commitment to the organization that way. And so kind of the steps that we walk through here are, take baby steps. Take 18 months to get this deployed. If you're having a challenge with thinking that you need to get this rolled out and working because of compliance, I'll promise you that that's not going to be the case. You can always negotiate with those folks. And if not, just bring us in and we'll do it for you. One use case at a time is really how we like to start things. Picking narrow, either a technology, maybe your firewalls, keep it within security so you can control those inputs, or maybe a use case that's quantifiable, right? Authentication, whatever it might be, but narrow that use case and try and take a life cycle approach. Implement it, get the alerts going, work through the process of remediation, and then doing compliance reporting. See a mini project through end to end so you can get a feel, your team can get a feel for what the template of success looks like. But narrowing that focus is critical, and even picking where the path goes from there. We say pick compliance first. Not be compliant, but try and do reporting on and visibility around compliance first. It's a great start. You can add security kind of as a second phase if you need to, but we say pick compliance first. And finally, whatever you do, pick a phase deployment. This is going to be critical. And project managing this is an extraordinarily difficult task if you haven't done it before. So let's talk about things that break SIEM. And a lot of it's what we talked about today. Turnover, huge issue, right? Number one issue, once you get up to speed, these guys get trained, they're worth a lot more, they leave you. Scope creep, we've talked a little bit about that. Understaffing is as bad as turnover. The boil the ocean approach. Having a political culture that doesn't like to hear that they're having a problem, telling them their baby's ugly. Unrealistic time frame in terms of what results you need to achieve can break a SIEM deployment. And finally, underfunding. All these things can take the best of ideas and just push it into permanent broken. And often what happens is when there's a failed project, the team doesn't feel good about themselves, they leave, and then you start over again. So let's look at a decision tree for SIEM execution. And it really starts with a goal. Do you want to look compliant? Do you want to be compliant? Or do you want to be secure? All kidding aside, that's a nice progression that we've seen a lot of companies take a look at in terms of building. And so you have to think along the ways, what am I trying to get out of this and how soon do I really need it? Not how soon do I think I need it, how soon does an expert think I need it? So here's a decision to think about whether to do it in-house or out of house and what you're trying to achieve here. So it really begins with, do you have a realistic budget? If you have a realistic budget, do you have a mature IT operation? And if you have that, do you have a realistic time to bring it in-house? And those have to be all green lights to take it in-house. If you have all those things, a realistic budget and a mature operation, but you don't have a short time, you should think about doing a managed service option. And along those lines, let's take a look at organizations that have a limited budget. And whether you have a realistic or limited budget, if you have immature IT, that's going to lead you down a different path as well. If you have an immature IT and you need to do it in-house, you really should rethink SIEM. There's a lot of other things you can do first. Maybe log aggregation is as kind of an interim step, but putting SIEM in on a bad foundation is a tough thing. Again, if you have immature IT, this is the best way. Although the feedback you're going to get from managed service providers to change a lot of things that are probably a surprise to you. So think, can you limit this to log aggregation? And in those cases, maybe you can lower the bar to bring it back in-house and at least kind of baby step your way into that deployment. Or again, there's plenty of managed service options out there for that. So talking about managed service options, that's something that RKON provides. And we want to talk through why organizations end up doing this and what's their defensible decision-making around bringing it in-house. Number one is economies of scale. It's less expensive. There are other benefits on that, but unless you're the largest of large organizations, you're just not going to have the economies of scale to do this correctly. You're always going to be splitting functions, and you're never really going to have the level of expertise to be efficient at this extraordinarily complex technology. A lot of it comes down to speed to execution. Really, how fast do you need to move? If you really need to be compliant in 90 days, don't even start to think about doing it yourself. Also, low-cost entry point. Even mid-sized SIEMs started at $250,000 to put in place. You can do a managed service for a couple grand a month and cover a good chunk of things to at least get that compliant checkbox going. Dedicated bandwidth to make sure you manage the system. How many organizations are going through changes, mergers, acquisitions, and their teams are distracted on consolidations, and in which case they're taken away from these systems, right? Definitely solves the turnover issue. Hey, we have turnover too, but I've got a lot of guys backing up to supporting a number of people versus the one-to-one ratio you often have at clients, and having a reliable cost structure the whole way. So a little background on us. We manage over 75,000 users, 300 clients in 32 different countries. Our uptime average for 4 years is 99.997, which so far we're about 35-40 minutes in, so that's about 3 years worth of downtime from our cloud. We've been ranked on the top 100 managed service providers in North America, and we've made Crane's Fast 50 the last few years, and Inc. 5000 the last couple of years, and we're advisor to Mira Manuel's growth plan in 14 and 15. So RKON offers two SIEM deployment options. The first one is customer premise implementation for clients that need some help getting something up and running. It's perfect for organizations that have the budget for proper staffing, have a few SIEM experts that they can staff up on, and it's a common replacement for abandoned legacy SIEM. We replace a lot of either old market pillar type SIEM, things that were too complex or required economies of scale, or there's a lot of vendors that have gone by the wayside on SIEM, and so there's just a common flow of replacement SIEMs out there. The second thing is SIEM-as-a-Service, which is a growing fast for us. Doesn't require any upfront capital. It's pay as you go. SIEM can be a very capital intensive, time intensive project. So no capital, you get to test the waters and start small. There's a lot of things that you need to change in your organization to wrap around SIEM to make it work properly. And it's perfect for clients who need compliance fast. The SIEM-as-a-Service just has a sample pricing. For a standard Windows server, it's $50 a month. For a network router, it's $50 a month. Something like a domain controller is $150 a month. Firewalls, IPSs, they're more expensive. Those things we have to talk about custom-wise, but we just wanted to give you a feel that this is something that's reachable for most organizations that can start as a small footprint from a deployment strategy. So let's talk about our SIEM-as-a-Service and what's included. You get version updates and patching and maintenance included, unlimited. Rule-based creation and security policy integration and optimization, unlimited. Unlimited moves, adds, changes. 24/7 incident response and monitoring. Use case development and justification. We're going to come to you and say, what about this? What about this? We're going to provide that roadmap for you. Remediation support to help your organizations understand the nature of the security risk and what's a glass ball, what's a rubber ball, and compliance reporting, right? Which is what it all comes down to. So what we're talking about is really a complete SIEM operation. And the truth is we can have you covered and audit ready in about 90 days consistently. So this is plugged into a larger service that we offer, which is IT Compliance-as-a-Service. It starts with our RKON Virtual CSO, and SIEM-as-a-Service is the right hand of all good CSOs in our opinion. You have to have 24/7 incident response and incident management as part of that. Advanced threat protection as a service is part of that offering, along with IPS and firewall as a service. And from that, it doesn't really matter what your compliance requirements are. We can have the majority of that covered in a very short period of time. And from a VCO standpoint, just to give you a little overview, this is a person that negotiates with your auditors, levels the playing field, helps justify C-level spending and risk, responsible for executing the compliance plan on behalf of the organization. Can be a very complex and time-consuming project for leadership. We'll project manage not only the auditors, but the compliance effort, and be a risk advisor along with security development, security policy development and alignment. Wrapping all this together is a service we call Zero to Compliance in 90 days. And this is pulling all the things we've talked about together under one roof. And it's really perfect for organizations to have extremely short time frame. They've got compliance requirements and they either don't have the skill sets to put that together, or they don't want to focus on that, staff it up, and don't have the time to execute on that. And so it really comes down to 3 steps. The first one is a compliance jumpstart, which is really just getting that first gap analysis on what we're trying to achieve and what do we need to achieve compliance. Compliance can be a giant project, and understanding where that line is drawn is the first step. Coming up with a risk mitigation plan, creating policy, interacting with auditors. Second step is really our managed security services, which we've talked a lot about. This is a more complete list. And the third step is RKON Security Operations, which we reviewed a little bit, but these are all the things that come into place. Things like change management, DR plan testing, these all have to be integrated in with most compliance templates. And we've taken a look at compliance in general, and about 95% of all the controls and processes you need for are common to almost all compliance platforms. But the big thing we do differently is we wrap people around this from a virtual chief security officer that understands our tools, understands compliance. Through the jumpstart, we plug your requirements into what we already know. We manage that and we sell this as an outcome versus selling a tool or individual service. We basically say, look, we're going to make you compliant. Here's all the tools that come into it, and basically here's our process. So our security clients are some of the more well-known entities in the country. We've got about 200 more outside of that. These are just some of the names. And with that